I've been getting a ton of messages over the last few days from people who are concerned about the government's new plan when it comes to the rental market, but who don't quite understand what it means. So I'm going to do my best to break down what this new plan will do and what impact it will have on renters. But this video will be a bit longer than my usual ones, so just bear with me. So the first thing to point out is that the average rent price across the country will go up. That's not scaremongering or being dramatic. The government have essentially accepted the fact that this plan will drive the average rent across the country up. The reason for that is because for the last number of years, most of the country has been under something called a rent pressure zone. And what that was essentially an area where landlords weren't able to increase the monthly rent by more than 2% per year. Now, this prevented landlords from taking advantage of tenants by increasing the prices to whatever they wanted, but it also made some landlords reluctant to rent out their properties because they wouldn't get as much money as they wanted to. Now the government are in a difficult situation because the housing crisis is getting worse, the price of rent is getting higher, and every month we have more and more homeless people. So as a way to incentivise landlords back to the market, they've come up with this absolutely astonishing plan that will see the entire country being put under a rent pressure zone. Now that sounds great, and that's what you'll hear them try to spin it as, and they're already talking about how this will be fantastic for renters and how it will give them more protections. But that's complete nonsense, because what they're also doing from March of next year is allowing landlords to jack up the price of rents to the average market value every time a tenant leaves their property, or if they don't leave, every 6 years. And what that means is that if you've been living in a rent pressure zone for the last 8 or 9 years, like most of the country has, your rent has only gone up 2% every year. So if for argument's sake you were able to get a house for €1,000 a month back in 2016, in 2017, that would have been raised by about €20 to 1,020. In 2018, another just over €20 to 1,040, and so on and so forth until now. What this new plan will do, and I want you to listen very close to this, is that it will allow your landlord from March of next year to immediately raise your rent price to the average market value. So if you got that house in Dublin for €1,000 a month back in 2016, you're probably paying around $1,200 a month for it now. Well, from March of next year, your landlord will be able to raise the price to the average market value in Dublin, which is €2,350. It's absolutely sickening. And once again, it's targeting the most vulnerable people in our society. But that's not all. The government are trying to spin this as some sort of positive by talking about these new protections that tenants will now have in place. And there are some protections baked into this bill. One of them is that no-fault evictions are set to be banned. Now bear in mind, almost every single opposition party has been calling for the end of no-fault evictions for years, and were repeatedly told by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that by doing so, it would drive up the price of rents. That will be in place, and that will mean that landlords can't just evict tenants for no apparent reason, which would be great if the government hadn't just given landlords the incentive to get rid of tenants as often as they can. Under this new plan, every time a tenant leaves, a landlord is able to increase the price of rent to the current market value. And because rents are going to continue to skyrocket under this plan, they'll be incentivised to have tenants moving in and out as often as possible. But if the landlord can't simply evict the tenant for no reason, then they'll have to find a way of making the tenant leave themselves. Whether that's a landlord who refuses to fix a leak or refuses to fix a dodgy alarm, or whether that's a landlord who stops answering emails or phone calls, all they have to do is make life so miserable for their tenant that the tenant moves out of their own accord, and they can add another few €100 onto the rent. And finally, despite the fact that the government are doing all of this in the hopes of getting landlords back to the market, Carol Tallon, a policy advisor who works with investors and landlords, has already said that landlords are furious at this new plan. So rent prices will go through the roof, more people will become homeless, landlords are essentially being advised to treat their tenants like dirt, and there's absolutely no evidence that any of this will bring any investment into the country. But once again, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael don't care.